Please give it up for the director of The Wicker Man and The Wicker Tree, Robin Hardy, the one and only. And the director of such films as Dust Devil, Hardware, and the Leather Coat, Segment and Peter Bizarre, Leather and Voice of the Moon and the White Darkness. Richard Stanley.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you one and all. I think we should take our pews.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you all for coming.
On vous remercie pour être ici.
Well, this is a great pleasure being here, and I'm glad the mic's working.
I'm glad that too.
So, as we only have 1 hour and much ground to cover, I thought we should just cut straight to the chase here and ask the question that I'm sure we all want to know, which is, Robin, what do you actually believe in terms of, if you're, oops, my mic is gone, that's back. On the census forms they make you fill out every few years in England, what would you put down? Christian, iconoclast, agnostic, pagan, curious?
I think curious is very good, but actually deeply agnostic. And you?
Well, I guess these days I'd have to say pagan. And then I finally dropped the other shoe about 4 years ago. I mean, I was curious for a long time, but I think I finally tilted over the edge.
Well, I don't know. I think every time you meet somebody who is passionately one thing or the other, you're drawn to seeing why that is. I find that if I go to a Catholic wedding and witness the whole marvelous piece of theatre that is, I'm drawn to wondering quite why and whether I could subscribe or not. Similarly, if I'm at a Buddhist ceremony, I find myself again curious and actually perhaps rather more seduced in that case. Did you find that?
Yeah, I've been kind of too much of a rationalist all my life, I think, in that although I've enjoyed the pageantry of religion, I've always been very scared of any kind of organized faith or dogma. Not a great believer in taking things on faith.
I rather agree with you there. I think one of the wonderful things is that religion has, whatever else it's done, given us some of the great literature in the world. It's no accident that you have Goethe, translating the Bible, and of course Luther himself, and in our case, a wonderful committee. I'd say in our case in the UK, of some of probably the best writers they could find who sat round a table and invented every other verse as it went along, and we get probably some of the best. I think, I don't know whether you agree, some of the best language in the English tongue in that book. In a way, one gets carried away with the language and all forgets about the message.
Yeah, very easy, and the same with some of the great paintings and artworks. I mean, we don't have to be a believer to be able to appreciate Michelangelo or some of the great art that's come out of, say, Roman Catholicism.
That's true. I get rather tired of bleeding bodies after a time, but yes, and indeed, devoted and wonderful though they are virgins.
Yeah, I like all the temptations of St. Anthony, really, the times when they got the chance to draw the creatures and naked succubi and things. You can see a lot of the painters were really relishing their apocalypses and temptations, because there was a chance to get away from all the rest of it.
That's true. There are some wonderful primitive painters, like Stanley Spencer was one of our painters, who does wonderfully primitive paintings of saints coming out of windows like curtains, and resurrections out of graves, and everyone looks pretty good shape, really, considering, although a little bit sort of diaphanous. I like that kind of art, which is really sort of rather basically religious.
Yeah, and of course in Catholicism they believe in the literal resurrection of the body at the end of time. The idea that you spring out of the grave and ascend at Judgment Day, which is, I guess, the reason that in the old days, when they couldn't catch you as a pagan or a witch in the Dark Ages, they would get your body and mutilate the corpse, just so that you wouldn't be whole at the end of time. And it's one of those little Catholic foibles.
The people in Haiti who bury you with a whole series of stones all around you just so as you won't get out of your grave and start walking around and frightening the children. That's another whole aspect of that, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess the Haitian zombie thing it's très compliqué.
Yeah.
Never quite got to the bottom of that one. I do sometimes wonder if the death and resurrection thing in Haitian voodoo isn't related to Masonic third degree to some extent.
I'd certainly never thought of that.
There's an awful lot of Masonic symbolism in voodoo. I mean, we're going off on a wild tangent there, but...
I think that's what we're here for.
Yeah. Well, I did notice that the moment I walked into the first voodoo humfo, saw the eye in the pyramid and started noticing the different Masonic regalia on the humgans that plainly somewhere along the line they'd picked up a lot of Masonic symbolism, and of course the business of being buried and then resurrected is a part of that.
I find the complicated handshake that you have to give if you're,
Yeah.
I don't quite know how to do it.
Well,
Something like
here's how
that.
it goes. This is
Is it?
first degree, second degree, third
Oh,
degree.
it's knuckles, I remember.
It's just, yeah, you
yes,
touch
yes.
the knuckle according to
That's
which
right,
degree
yes.
you're at, yeah.
Yes. Do you have to have your apron on that or not?
No, it's...
Your trowel, perhaps?
no, but
We
you
shouldn't
can
make fun of a
stand
very,
with
very
your...
serious religion.
You can stand with your feet at right angles.
Okay.
Or there's the business of putting your hand to your heart with the thumb at right angles to the palm, which is another dead giveaway.
And one trouser sort of partly rolled up to the knee.
Yeah, that's kind of too much of a giveaway, though. But yeah.
We believe that most of the police in Edinburgh are Masons. I can't say that I've seen them wandering around with their trousers rolled up, although it's a nice thought.
No, they don't, but I did mention to you before the anecdote where when I went to visit Roslin Chapel last, you have to get a bus from Edinburgh railway station, and initially when we inquired when the next bus was going, they said half an hour. Then my friend, who was basically the principal sojourner at a lodge in London, gave him a Masonic handshake. He said, oh no, there's a bus in 15 minutes. We got a much quicker bus to Roslin. But yeah, coming back to where we started with, so you'd say you're an agnostic more than anything else.
I think so, because that opens all possibilities, doesn't it? I mean, if a bus comes by which has got a nice religion in it, then you hop on that bus and on you go. And if you're an agnostic, you don't need a ticket, you just can ride. So I think it's a comfortable thing. Years ago, I was producer of a show in New York, which was called Lighten to Thy Feet or something like that. And I got the job because I was agnostic. And it was a time when Mr. Nixon was saying, I don't care what religion you've got, as long as you've got a religion. And so every Sunday we had a different show, and each Sunday a different religion, which happened to be around about New York, like the Lutherans or the Presbyterians or the Catholics or whatever they were, got a chance to do a film about, or a show about their particular belief or something which illustrated their particular belief. And it was a very interesting show, actually, from my point of view. As I say, I couldn't have had it if I'd been a Catholic or an Orthodox Jew or any proper religion, just a good agnostic.
Excellent. So surely, you must appreciate the irony of being responsible for a movie which has done so much to revitalize the neo-pagan movement all over the world.
Well, when we originally toured the Wicker Man in the United States in the 70s, and Christopher Lee and I went, finally having started in San Francisco, we got down to the Bible Belt. And we had this brilliant group of students from Tulane University who were organizing the whole thing. And they were organizing prayer breakfasts. I don't know if you've been to prayer breakfasts.
I haven't, but
It's a bazaar. I mean, think the White House has them all the time.
That's true.
Anyway, the prayer breakfast, we showed the film, and there would be a Lutheran and a Catholic and a Presbyterian and an Anglican and so on. And they were then invited to talk about the film and see whether they would recommend it to their parishioners. It was quite a daring thing to do, actually, in the South, which wasn't all that tolerant even then. And to our amazement, the reverends were quite impressed with the Wicker Man. They said, it's the only film we've seen which actually talks seriously about the resurrection, which it does.
indeed.
And so I think some of them actually recommended it from their pulpit. Hide your eyes, I suppose, when Bruce Eklund comes on. Wait for the good ending when he burns and goes straight to heaven. That's maybe that. Anyway, both Christopher Lee and I were made honorary colonels, like Colonel Sanders.
Excellent.
In Louisiana, I think it was. No, it was Kentucky. And so, again, I suppose if we'd been some particular religion, it would have been a problem.
Of course, what's great about Wicker Man is it sits on the fence. We don't know if Sergeant Howie is really resurrected, just we don't know if their apples improve.
That's right. Apples weren't meant to be grown on these islands. I think that Howie's gamble, I like to think his gamble didn't come off, don't you? When
It says that Christopher Lee, Lord Summerall, will be next.
Christopher's gamble, it doesn't come off. Yes, next year you'll be the guy. I like to think that's the way it actually ended.
Yeah. Did you draw any inspiration from Funthorn? I've always been wondering. You're familiar with the Funthorn story?
No, please tell it.
It's a community in Scotland who started growing extraordinary fruit after basically becoming pagan. They started off as a UFO cult, but then started seeing fairies. And in the 70s, they had a best-selling book called The Magic of Funthorn. It was somewhere just around that period. But yeah, it's exactly that. Fruit shouldn't be grown in those islands kind of argument. I was always wondering if there was a connection between Funthorn and Summerall.
No, I'd heard of Funthorn, but I never heard of that particular story.
Yeah, they claim to be in touch with elementals, I guess, fairies or whatever. And,
In the days when the Scots drank seriously, as when it was banned in most of the places in the country, we had to go 3 miles to get a drink on a Sunday and that sort of thing. I think all sorts of wonderful imaginings and myths came out of their good liquor. But I think they've become much more down to earth these days. And when in The Wicker Tree, the Reverend says the godless Scotland, where they don't even believe in angels. I actually heard that line. I was on a plane, and there were a couple of evangelists. I was on to New York, and they were actually talking about how astounding it was that they'd been to this religious gathering. Maybe it was the Lambeth Conference of Anglicans, I don't know. And they say, they don't even believe in angels. And I thought how deeply troubled they must be.
how very perplexing for them.
Yes, exactly. Very perplexing.
Yeah, and of course, thanks to you, nowadays we have the Beltane Fire Society in Scotland, amongst other folk.
Yes.
And Catholicism is losing its grip in mainland Europe. I mean, they can no longer actually burn you at the stake, and there's not a lot they can really do. The threat of excommunication doesn't mean a lot, and I'm finding that the hold of the Orthodox Church over Europe is weakening. I believe there were as many pagan hand fastings in the British Isles in the last year or so as there were church weddings. It's becoming awfully popular.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, the actual Wiccan faith puts itself out as being the fastest growing faith in the world.
Do you think they're being boastful?
They've probably been boastful, but I can see that Catholicism's run into a lot of trouble lately. It's definitely lost a lot of credibility, and it's also lost a lot of its power. It's no longer the monolithic force it once was. And we are seeing the old ways and also strange new syncretic faiths and mutant religions are starting to grow pretty fast.
I think the trouble is with that, a lot of various kinds of good that the churches have done over the years is getting thrown out necessarily because of the association of the excesses of in Ireland and elsewhere of bachelor schoolmasters doing what they do, and I'm astounded. I mean, 40 years ago in Ireland there was a protest. A women's protest, because any kind of contraception was absolutely banned by the Constitution. And a group of very brave women got thousands of French letters and blew them up like balloons and arrived at the railway station in Dublin with these things. And needless to say, there were a great deal of photographs taken. And it was one of the early feminist protests, a very imaginative one, I think. These days, I mean, just last week, the Parliament actually voted to send a protest to the Pope personally, because he wouldn't restrain his bishops and make them, act against this kind of excess which has been going on recently. And so it's no longer in the Constitution, and in 40-odd years, the whole thing has changed utterly.
Well, the celibacy has always been one of the great Achilles' heels of Catholicism, because, of course, with paganism and voodoo and stuff, they've taken an approach where basically giving in to your animal instincts and actual licentiousness in voodoo, partying down, going out and dancing through the night, is actually a way of scoring spiritual brownie points. Yes. Whereas in the West, for all kinds of reasons, if we go out to an all-night rave or something, we then have to go and say Hail Marys and apologize for it. So plainly, this gives paganism and voodoo and things this very slight edge, in that you can go out and have a good time and at the same time feel that you're getting closer to your faith or to your god or goddess.
Let me ask you about Africa, because this is an area that you dare say well, and your wonderful film that is set there is full of varying degrees of magic. And is it true that after years of evangelism of various kinds, there is an underlying original religion, as rather like we have in the Wicker Man, in that case a Celtic religion, but in that case an animist religion, or what?
For certain, a magical culture survives out there in secret. I mean, there's certainly a witchcraft tradition out there which is very ancient.
Nothing like Haiti, then?
Well, Haiti is kind of different. Haiti is really interesting because somewhere along the line, Haiti got itself cross-pollinated with a whole bunch of European esoterica. Because in Haitian voodoo, you've got pentagrams and the aforementioned eyes of the pyramids and a lot of things which are actually part of European esoterica, which have somehow been adopted into their faith, whereas South Africa is quite a long way removed from it all. I mean, the witch doctors, the Sangoma, suffered for a long time because obviously, first of all, they had the missionary culture on the one side, the Dutch Reformed Church, who absolutely abhorred witchcraft and stigmatized all of it as the work of the devil. And on the other hand, you had the SWAPO and the ANC and people who were essentially communist, who adhered towards communist atheism and saw witchcraft as being something primitive and almost a slander against their culture. But between Christianity and communism, they weren't really being favored for ages. But now I think we're seeing in the new South Africa a gradual acceptance of what they're calling traditional healers, and they've certainly been regrouping. And intriguingly, there really is a body of knowledge which has been passed down for a long time. They very carefully initiate people into this information. I certainly haven't gone through that myself, but I've heard enough about it to be able to see that it's a pretty organized culture. You've got characters like, say, Mujaji, the Rain Queen, in Mujaji's Kraal, who is apparently immortal, who's been there forever, who has to rubber stamp each one of South Africa's presidents, a bit like the Queen of England. They believe that Mujaji is replaced whenever she starts to show signs of age. I think in the old days, the idea was that she was strangled, and then her body was used as part of the rain-making medicine to ensure that the crop, the harvest returned and the rain all happened. But to all intents and purposes, she's meant to be immortal. She's the real-life equivalent of Aisha, who must be obeyed.
Rider Haggard.
Rider Haggard got the idea from there, yeah. But she's real, and there's a Mujaji in Mujaji's Kraal right now. There's a
Does
Rain
she have
Queen
a recognizable face? I mean, she's very beautiful before she ages, right?
Yeah, you're not meant to look at her. For ages, she's meant to be kept sequestered in the kraal, so you never see her, but she's sure there. There's a Mujaji, a Rain Queen, reigning right now. Some of those traditions have survived since the mists of antiquity.
So much more vivid and colourful and interesting than the Reformed Church, the Dutch Reformed Church, which was the principal religion for a time, right?
Yeah, and again, I think it's very hard to keep people repressed for that long. There's always the return of the repressed has to happen sooner or later.
It was very tempting. I mean, when I've stayed in South Africa with friends who were members of that church, of the Reformed Church, I remember religion coming up, although God knows one tried to avoid it. And the whole story of Noah's Ark, in which everyone went 2 by 2, and God had destroyed everybody else on earth except Noah's family. And I remember asking them, yes, because black people were described as the hewers of wood and the pullers of water. There was a sort of, I don't know, euphemism in that particular religion for what the Germans might have called Untermensch in the 30s. And I remember asking where they thought the stowaway was with his family. And was the stowaway the hewer of wood and the puller of water? And there was a lengthy silence, and the subject was changed because you either believed in the Noah story or you didn't.
Yeah, this insistence on the literal belief in the Old Testament has always baffled me, and the idea that there had to be a Noah's Ark and they really had to have taken 2 of every animal. It just seems so outrageously far-fetched. But amazingly, born-again Christians are still dying every year on Mount Ararat looking for the thing. They lost someone about 2 years ago up there. They keep going and looking for insisting they're going to find the Ark up there somewhere.
Yes, well.
Determined to find the literal truth of it. None of them seem to realize that the Noah's Ark story is found exactly this, almost verbatim in the Epic of Gilgamesh, in Sumerian mythology, which predates the Old Testament by quite a ways. Exactly the same things happen. He builds the ark, takes all the animals on board, and the deluge comes. And right down to the business of the bird, bringing the sprig to show that dry land is out there. The only difference between the Sumerian version and the Old Testament version is in the Old Testament there's just one God, and he sends a rainbow to say that he will not send the deluge again. Whereas in the Sumerian version, there's a whole bunch of warring gods who are against each other, and they look down and see the humans coming out of the ark, and they say, there's still people alive down there. Who's responsible for this? Why don't we kill them all? And then they discover that one of the other gods has helped them and has tipped them off, and then immediately there's a war in heaven as the gods fight each other over who's responsible for saving them. But it's Noah's Ark's adopted directly from the Sumerian mythology.
Meanwhile, next year, hopefully we're going to make a film here called The Wrath of the Gods, where they, again, with their Norse gods, and they fight each other quite a bit. So it seems to be a sort of occupational hazard for a god.
It always seemed to me, if you're going to admit to the existence of one god, then why not 10 gods or 1,000 gods? I mean, once you've made the leap of faith to accepting that a god exists, then why limit it to just one? And of course, the moment you've got more than one god, there's this potentiality for them disagreeing with each other or
Yes, and wanting some kind of exclusivity.
Yeah, always it seems. Constant warring in heaven.
Yes.
I mean, that's the Grecian gods were always like that too, as well as the Sumerian gods, constantly vindictive, constantly scoring points of each other and constantly stabbing each other in the back.
How lucky we are to be passive, quiet, peaceful. Vox pop.
Oh well, so curving back to Wicker
Do you
Man
think we
again.
can convert this lot here?
I'd convert them to what?
Well, that's a thought. Maybe they have some suggestions. What would they
To
like
high
be
energy
converted
fuel,
to?
perhaps. But yeah, it's I'd certainly like to try, but it's not necessarily my purpose to proselytize.
Oh, no?
Well, I guess I'm more of a cowboy for Cthulhu than a cowboy for Christ. But